Hi, I'm Tim. Welcome to our channel, and thanks for logging on. If you enjoy these videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel right here on Watchbox Reviews. I'd really appreciate it, and then I'd be able to deliver my best to your inbox every day. If you enjoy the watches, you can see them all for sale on our website, thewatchbox.com, the internet's largest single-source repository of pre-owned luxury and vintage timepieces. Buy, trade, or sell, including this watch, on thewatchbox.com. Now, the timepiece on my wrist is a modern classic, the instant hit from Variant 1 and Day 1. The Tudor Heritage Black Bay came to define the revival of the Tudor brand in the modern era. This is the flagship in V1 with the ETA-powered 13mm thick steel case. They got fatter when the in-house caliber arrived. This is a simple watch that continues the ETA power traditions for Tudor divers that date back to the early 1960s. Of course, today they have in-house calibers, but the ETAs are tough, time-tested, and historically linked to the Tudor brand. So let's talk about how this one fits and feels. 41mm across the round of the case does not include the crown. The watch is thinner than a contemporary in-house caliber Black Bay. It's 13mm thick, so very close to the 12.6mm of a Submariner. Lug-to-lug, the watch is 50mm, which means it wears well on my 16cm circumference wrist, and I've often said that 50mm lug-to-lug is a critical measurement for those with smaller male wrists, 14 to about 16.5cm circumference. You want 50 or fewer millimeters across the wrist. It is a comfortable watch because the end links of the bracelet are pivoted rather than projecting. The watch measures true. Lug-to-lug is the distance across the wrist. The bracelet is very comfortable, but it's also substantial. It doesn't feel like an entry-level product. Rolex bracelets in very recent memory were not this solid or handsomely equipped. You can see 3-link design, oyster style, satin finished on the top, polished on the flanks, large channels on the underside to avoid pinching skin or pulling hair. All of the individual sizable links are removed with screws, no pins and sleeves here. You also note that the clasp is nicely made. It's finished internally with a high polish. There is actually a ceramic set of retaining pins so that the clasp will maintain its tolerances. Ceramic will not wear down over time. 3 micro-sizing increments so you can dial this in using a strap tool. And of course there's a channel in the clasp, so when you close the clamshell to lock it, note the form of the Tudor crest, attention to detail. There's also a flush fit laterally and also vertically. It simply parks in its own little recess that is profiled to match the shape of the clasp. Now, the timepiece itself is simple. In some ways it's inspired by vintage Rolex and Tudor, and let's get a little bit closer here and focus on some of those details. The way that this one really recalls history is the beveling on the profile of the lugs. This is something that disappeared a generation ago on Rolex watches. Tudor continues to give you a little bit of bevel. It's a machine bevel to be sure, but it's a handsome and evocative vintage element. You will note, however, it's very much of a modern Rolex supercase profile, perhaps even more super than the supercase. This is a very sheer flank, all of high polished contrast with the satin finish of the lug hoods. Now, the bezel and the dial. It is an aluminum anodized insert in a gorgeous red that's nicely cued to the rose gold tones of the dial, the gilt style printing, the rose gold plated hands at center, and of course you have a micro knurling on the outside and a robust detent that you can really hear and feel. It's sharper, more pronounced, and I would say a little bit more mechanical and perhaps notchy and clearly detented than a Rolex bezel. Those tend to be a little bit more creamy Cadillac. This one is more like an M22 Rock Crusher transmission. I love the mechanical aspect of it because it's a throwback to an old school diver in its feel and its sound. You line it up with the minute hand, now you have an impromptu 0 to 60 minute count up timer. I find that there's no better chronograph than a dive bezel. 9 times out of 10 I need to time something. A dive bezel is easier to read and easier to set, easier to reference at a glance than a chronograph with its sub-registers. So the dial, with all applied indices, a level of refinement that no 1960s Tudor or even Rolex Submariner would have enjoyed. Of course, a little bit of a pastiche collection. You see vintage elements from the late 60s to mid 70s snowflake Tudor Submariners, but at the same time you see a number of elements such as the rose logo and the overall profiling of the case without crown guards, the big crown, the dial graphics, that seem more of a throwback to the 50s and 60s generations of Tudor Submariners. The watch does feature double rose crests. As you can see, the rose crest emblem is on the crown, as well as the dial center later on Tudor in the modern era. Let's get a little bit more light in this frame because it's downright dungeon-like, close to the camera. The current in-house calibers feature the Tudor Shield at 12 o'clock. A handsome combination, without a date, beautifully balanced, the classicist's choice. Inside, 200 meters water resistant ETA 2824, tank tough, automatic winding, 38-hour power reserve, 28,800 vibrations per hour, and yes, if you are to thread out the screw down crown and pull it to extremity, there is a hacking seconds function for those of you who wish to synchronize to some sort of a reference. Handsome, evocative, yet modern and fit finishing capability. Don't be afraid to get this vintage-inspired watch wet. That is always the Achilles heel of a vintage sports watch. It's really past its prime as a sports watch and more of an anachronistic dress watch. This one is full-featured and ready to rock and roll wherever you are. You can see and you can purchase this Tudor Heritage Black Bay on the watch box. And we're back with the Tudor Heritage Black Bay. This is the reference 79220R. Steel case, red bezel, but glorious in green by night. See it by the light of day on the watch box.